Greetings, it is I, the Annex. As with every Halloween, I like to give my fans treats, and so this year is no exception. On top of my creepy erotic projects that you all enjoy, I have decided to share some of the paranormal stories that my fans have told me. Now I shall be giving these in story format rather than simply reading what they wrote, because after all, I am a boogeyman. I shall not embellish or add anything to their true ghost stories, although I will be using my own words to tell them. So, now that you understand how this works, if you happen to have had any paranormal experiences in your life and would like to share your stories with me, do email me your tales, and I shall do more uploads like this, should it prove popular. Now, let us make like an undertaker and dig right in, shall we? This first one happened to this Annexverse fan when they were around 10 years old. It was late at night, and they had been having fitful nightmares of hellish scenes. Cracked obsidian ground with crimson light dancing beneath it, the skeletal birds made of red bone, flying through the air, making a cacophony of creepy calls, and finally a devil set upon a throne within a volcano which itself set upon a sea of molten magma. As this fiend reached out with clawed hand and touched the dreamer's forehead, he awoke. However, this is where things truly become horrific, because once his eyes opened, he found himself unable to move. Paralyzed, he could move but only his eyes, his limbs useless at his sides. Outside, a storm rolled and lightning flickered, thunder boomed, and he was certain that he was awake, but fear gripped his heart, because still he laid frozen, held tight by an unseen force. As his eyes scanned the darkness, he spied a shadowy hand with long, spindly fingers reach out and grasp the top of his doorway. Still unable to move, he could only watch in terror as a pair of red eyes lurched down in the total darkness beyond his doorway. These hateful orbs gazed into his own eyes, and finally, a torrent of powerful, primordial dread pushed free like a geyser, and he shrieked in an avatistic fright. As the red eyes vanished in the hallway, his parents stumbled through his door. To this day, the scene haunts him, yet he only experienced it once. A dream, mayhap, or a transient spirit of darkness just stumbled upon a sleeping boy. The next fan sent me his story about 2 possible paranormal encounters that he experienced. Sometimes, as he is simply going about his business in his room, perhaps studying when he's home alone, he will clearly hear the sound of footsteps upon his floorboards walking out of his room. Unsettling as this might be, the other 2 experiences were luckily one time only. Sitting at his computer chair for a long while, he had been watching videos and finally leaned back and stretched his arms. However, in that quick moment, as he naturally pulled back his arms, he felt his hands make physical contact with someone's head. Someone had been standing right behind him, lurched over the top of his chair, watching whatever video that he watched. There stood a moment where both parties appeared shocked and frozen, his arms frozen in place, and the head of his unknown visitor remaining stock still. Then, as that moment of shock passed, terror welling up within his heart, he bolted forward, turning on a light and spinning around, only to find himself alone in his room. Whatever, or whoever, had been standing behind him had simply vanished, and yet there was no physical way they could have escaped the room in so little time, and without him hearing or seeing them flee. The other incident happened as he was taking a shower. Within his bathroom, he had a frosted glass sliding shower door. Everything up until this point in his day had been quite normal and unassuming. However, as he showered and the room filled with the hot steam, he noticed from the corner of his eye that movement occurred just outside that shower door. He spun his head quickly, and a large silhouette stood in the bathroom. A frog stuck in his throat as he could not scream, and then the figure moved towards him. As it reached the shower door, filling his vision, the glass suddenly rattled as if someone shook it. Instinctively, and just in time, he reached out and held the door closed, feeling someone trying to slide it open. The shaking and struggle continued, and then the silhouette instantly vanished, and at that moment the shaking stopped as well. Terrified at the same time, he slid the glass open, ready to confront it, perplexed and working on adrenaline, and yet he was alone in the bathroom. Again, and no one could have escaped. Confused and scared, unable to understand what had happened and relieved to be alive, he began to cry and never forgot that mentally scarring experience. I have saved the best for last, since this final true ghost story happened at 3 a.m. on Halloween night. It took place in 2017 in Denton, Texas. That night, for a lark, the writer and his brother decided to go to Goatman's Bridge to see if anything spooky would happen. From what they had heard, the legend said that in the 1950s there was an African-American goat farmer that lived there. This fellow excelled at his craft, becoming the most successful goat farmer in North Texas. However, the local Ku Klux Klan at the time did not appreciate this fact, and these men snuck into his home, dragged the poor screaming fellow out into the night, and hanged him from the old Alton Bridge. However, when they looked over the side of the bridge, expecting to see his dangling body, they found nothing but an empty noose, and yet these foul men did not hear a splash either. Panicking, they thought him a type of warlock or demon and rushed back to his home and torched it. As it burned to the ground, the painful cries of this farmer's wife and children echoed out into the callous night. Ever since then, people report seeing shadowed figures in the woods surrounding the bridge, and some even appear to go missing. According to this fan, it was once local tradition to drive one's car to the base of the bridge, turn the vehicle off, and honk the horn 3 times, incidentally a common motif in these situations across the U.S. Supposedly, when one turned their car back on, the Goatman would be standing there, directly in front of it. Another tale in the area is that of a little girl who wandered into the woods and became lost. Her mother rushed in to fetch her, but then the mother also vanished. Search parties allegedly scoured the area, but found only a little girl's doll and nothing more. However, since their disappearances some decades ago, people report hearing a crying woman walking the trails at night. And of course, what a place would not be complete without the locals claiming that satanic rituals have been performed in that place with pentagrams and sacrifices. Oh my, terrifying, isn't it all? But that brings us back to their wayward Halloween spooktacular at Goatman's Bridge. Once the siblings arrived, they found that they had to park quite a ways back, as the city had shut down Old Alton Bridge and built a new bridge next to it. They state that the reason for this was because so many people would go missing around the old bridge. Every week, abandoned cars would be found at the spot, so out with the old and in with the new. The pair stepped out of the car and began walking down the street towards the bridge when a loud scream shattered the silence and spilled out of the woods. There were no other cars present or signs that anyone else had been there at the time, 3 in the morning, and though slightly scared, they were determined to see this bridge. As they grew closer to the old bridgeway, an eerie aura permeated the air about them, bringing a general sense of unease. They cross the threshold of the woods where lies the old Alton Bridge, the trails having been gated off by city officials, and finally they reached their quarry. The moment that he stepped upon the bridge, a feeling of electric cold swirled in the air about him, making all his hairs stand on end. They walked out onto the bridge and looked about when he suddenly felt as if they were being watched. Peering about, he looked across the bridge and saw a tall shadow figure with a white head staring back at him. In disbelief, he blinked hard and opened his eyes, yet the ghastly figure still stood staring back. This time, with more urgency, he rubbed his eyes with his hands, and yet again that figure stood, stoically staring at the pair standing upon the haunted bridge. Now, believing this was a sort of pareidolia, he turned and tapped his brother on the shoulder, getting his attention, and they glanced back, only to find the figure gone. That sent a wave of chills down his spine. Yet it piqued a morbid fascination within himself, wanting to see if somehow it had been a person and not a specter. He wanted to cross and search further. His brother, on the other hand, had already had enough and desired only to leave. Yet eventually he talked his poor fool of a brother into going with him further. Persevering, the pair made their way to a trail, but as they reached it, a feeling of nausea appeared to fall over both men. The sensible brother would go no further, but our witness faced up to the fear and pushed forward. Just ahead, on the dark trail, some trees had grown in such an unnerving fashion as to make a sort of archway with their branches. He felt that he at least wanted to step through this to help satiate his curiosity, and then he'd turn back and go with his brother. However, as he reached this tree archway and made to cross under it, he could suddenly make out what appeared to be a crouched shadow figure in the center of the trail before him. Again, he believed it to be a sort of pareidolia, not believing that ghostly shadows would haunt the woods for real, and so he stood silent, looking for any way to explain the shadow. But it was being cast by no tree, rock, or bush. Genuinely confused, he rubbed his eyes, but it still seemed like a person, made of shadow, crouched in the path ahead. Leaning forward, perplexed, he desired to get a better look, and it almost appeared as if the thing had fur. At that moment, what he could make out to be the head peered over its shoulder back towards him. For a moment, the two stood staring at each other, each surprised to see the other, when a loud, guttural growl reverberated all around him, shaking the bones in his very body, a sound that he has never heard before nor since, and has never been able to find any animal noise that could even come close to this demonic snarl. At that moment he shot straight up, yet froze in place from abject terror. He tried to yell for his brother, but only a quiet whisper of the word, "Run," did he manage to eke out in his fright. His brother down the trail could see something amiss and shouted for him. Yet, somehow, even while this thing turned around and stood to face him, hearing his brother broke the spell that held his fear, and he turned, running faster than he had ever run, screaming at the top of his lungs for his brother to flee. The two sprinted back to their car, literally scared to stop or even look back, and tore out of the area. As they sped down the road, he asked his brother about the otherworldly roar, but his brother had heard nothing except when he had turned and screamed to run in panic. The pair got to their house, and now so late at night and having faced such paranormality, they both fell into their beds to sleep it off. However, As he laid there, he began to notice a scratching sound, which, as it grew louder, he placed it as the sound of fingernails dragging along the wall leading upstairs in their home. These stairs, which the brothers knew well, would creak as someone climbed them, and step by step they could hear someone or something ascending the dark stairway. The sounds traveled all the way to the top of the stairs, and he held his breath, waiting for it to enter his room, when the sound suddenly turned and went back down the stairs. Once at the bottom, they again ascended, only terrifying him more. For a while he heard those sounds, but the fatigue of it all grew too much to bear, and he passed out to sleep with troubled dreams. However, he suddenly found himself startled awake because he could not breathe. Lying face down upon his pillow, he tried to sit up, but a new terror assailed him as he found himself to be wide awake and paralyzed. Then he could feel it. A dreadful cold hand pressed down upon the back of his skull, pushing his face even harder into his pillow, and still, even as the greatest fear of his life wrenched away at his soul, he could do nothing. He knew that he would die, that whatever this thing was, it meant to kill him. He prayed to his God. He tried to struggle, and everything for naught. So he accepted that this was to be his end, and he ceased any attempts to struggle, just as he was certain that the lack of oxygen had grown too great, and he could feel himself slipping away into oblivion. The hand released him. Gasping for air, he shot out of bed, ready to fight, but found no one. However, he always kept his door closed at night, and now noticed it was slightly ajar. In the dim light, he could make out what looked like a black fog slip out of the doorway. The adrenaline pumping through his veins caused him to give chase, and he ran out after this flowing dark mist. He ran downstairs, following it into the kitchen, and there he found his brother doing laundry. Just as he was about to ask his brother if he had seen the mist, their garage door opened of its own accord. In all his time at that house, that door had never before opened on its own, and he says that after that incident, he never again experienced sleep paralysis. He also never woke up with his face down on his pillow. None of these things have happened to him since that night either. Since then, with friends, he has returned to the woods near Goatman's Bridge on other occasions. He says that they have witnessed the will-o'-the-wisps. Those are little glowing orbs of light that float about and seem to move of their own will, intelligently. He's felt presences sneaking up behind him, and hears a heavy chain dragging on the ground behind his party as they walk the trails. And of course, he's witnessed more shadowy figures, not unlike myself, still roaming the woods and haunting the bridge. And so there you have a few true ghost stories as told by Annexverse fans that have survived these strange encounters of the supernatural. As I have said before, I'd gladly tell more tales of the paranormal that you fine, freaky folks have experienced. You need only email me. The more descriptive that you can be, where it happened, when, how it made you feel, the better I can spin your yarn for others to enjoy a nice spook. Also, do not forget all the Halloween treats that I have shared with the community this year. Mind you, my projects are adult-only, designed for 18 and up, as they contain erotic sexual content, but for those that want to experience erotic horror, they should hit the spot for this time of year. For Halloween of 2021, you have 3 treats to taint your psyches. There is Giggle Night, which is story mode only for now, all the way up to Chapter 4, and you get all of those bad ends, and that is all free to the public. See all the creepy things that could happen to Trixie Goodwin, And that's before she becomes a superhero. That's right, Slugs and Bugs Conversion has a free release as well. Go and enjoy all of the Evelyn Adams content. You'll get to convert her, bit by bit, into your alien sex slave. And finally, the full release of the entire story mode of Desideratum, game mode is, pending, is now totally free to the public. You can finally find out how the massive tale ends for Absinthe Van Gothen and her fellow Night Stalkers. All the character unlocks are also available, with all the lore you expect from one of my projects, and of course, you can access all the dark, sexy, bad ends as well. So, you have hours upon hours of free entertainment for your pleasure. Make sure you check the links. Of course, to create all this for you takes me thousands and thousands of hours a year, so do consider investing in my hard work. Remember that investors gain many perks, including early releases of all content long before the public. And for those that do support me, as this is my only income, thank you so much. It is because of you that we get to enjoy all this dark debauchery. So, that concludes this year's Halloween treats. I hope that you enjoyed it. A happy Halloween to you all. Now, back to the Shadowlands I go, to rot more dark projects for you to enjoy. See you next time.